My name's Lybrand, and welcome to a reading from my new book, Twigchap. Let's begin.
Twigchap. Chapter 1. The Monster. It is a fine thing to be alone. Wasper the Hob did not mind other folk, but often other folk asked him to mind. Mind this, mind that. Would you mind doing this, doing that? Do you mind? Being alone means no one else is around to ask such questions. It was a sunny day, though chill. Wasper walked beside his dodo bird, who carried a bundle of firewood on its back. The wood wasn't for warmth, though indeed those nights might be frosty, or mild, one rarely knew. The firewood was for another hob, called Zuz, who brewed potions and the like. So it was that Wasper and his dodo walked coolly in the wild weeds. The grass broke under their boot and talon. The larches above were giant and silver glimmering as ever, their leaves gold and green like treasure pieces, yet living and alive. The hobs did not call themselves hobs. They had other names for their kind. Some people of the land called them wood gnomes, some oak hobs, cone hobs, tree goblins. They accepted some of these names, but never used them. Most took offence to being called gnomes, and most got into loud conversations with whomever did the gnome calling. "We're nothing like those daffy warmongering wretches," some hobs have been quoted as saying. "We don't go looking for trouble the way they do." Truth be told, no one in that land could tell gnomes and hobs apart. The hobs were little men, usually bearded, spry and resourceful. The gnomes were little men, usually bearded, brisk and skillful. Likely they were all cousins and did not care to admit it. This hob, Wasper, was a self-assured fellow. He wore his beard long, down to his breeches. His moustache, too, was notable. Each wing drooped and curled alongside the beard. His hair was black as fresh mud. He dressed in a starchy tunic and woolen pants, pointed boots, after the fashion of the day, and a magnanimous hat on his head. The brim was wide as a platter. A dodo feather sat tucked in the band. The dodo from whom the feather had fallen missed it, which is not surprising, as dodos are famous for missing. Still, to see the feather in his master's hat every day was all right. It was near enough. This dodo was a docile dodo. Whether carrying his master or some luggage, like the firewood, he did his work with a dignified air, one that communicated, "I may not know where we are going or why, but I won't stand in the way of progress." This lofty complex is not uncommon in woodland dodos, which makes them excellent beasts of burden. Still, Wasper had to be quick to the reins if ever his bird saw a bee or a locust or any other winged snack. And surely it would be a day of chaos and chase if a serpent crawled across the road. Dodos cannot abide serpents, nor serpents dodos. Snails make nice refreshment too, so it is said, and rarely put up a fight. Wasper led the dodo along. The grass bowed to a breeze. The trees chirped and shone. A high warble filled the air, though it was no lark song. It was a scream, fearful and drawing closer. A tiny man broke through the weeds and grass to their right. He saw Wasper and pointed at him, and raised a crude wooden club, and bounced in place, almost smiling. "Wasper, you'll do." He was short and stout, with wispy hair caught all over a nubby head, like it was stuck there, unbelonging. His eyes were blue and bright, his beard red and frilly like a dragon's back. He wore animal skin as a suit, badger and fox, so it looked. "Why do you scream so, little fool?" said Wasper, tipping his hat. "You'll wake the devil with your noise." "He's already been woked," said the tiny person. "That's why I scream." "Nay," said Wasper. "That atrocity was done off some time back. One of the dogs did it, I heard." "Not him," said the small man. "Something worse. Something tall as a rock, mean as a tree, strong as a lake." "You're no poet, Cavey," said Wasper. "How'd you thought you were one?" "He's a monster and a terror to the woods," said the small man. "He stands outside my cave. I can't get back in, Hobman." "Is it a bear?" "No," said the tiny man, shaking his stringy head. "Come along, Hobber. Come stab him with your sword for me." Wasper chuckled, putting his hand on the pommel of his weapon. He carried it when he strolled or worked the woodlands. It was a good fit for his stature, shaped like a falchion. He called it gorse, after the prickly weed. The dodo, meanwhile, had kept his eye on the tiny man ever since he appeared. This was how it was whenever the dodo saw a cavey. They were such a small people, though certainly larger than insects. Still, one never knew what was edible and what wasn't until one pecked. "I'm at work, bullocks," said Wasper to the little fellow, "carrying this kindling to Zaz for his oasts and cauldrons. He'll go elsewhere for his lumbering if I'm late. That's just the way of it." "You do not care that I have lost my home?" asked Bullocks, the tiny man. "You're a cavey," said Wasper. "What good's that club if you never club with it? I thought you folk went on long hunts and downed strange beasts and burned bonfires for dancing. Where's your bravado, Bullocks?" "I can best any creature made of flesh," said Bullocks, pounding his breast with a fist. "But this is a monster, you understand. It is unearthly and unworldly. I will not fight spirits." "I take your meaning," said Wasper, tipping his hat. "Shame he isn't camped outside my home. Good afternoon." Little Bullocks felt displeased by this dismissal. Wasper and the dodo kept walking through the weedy way, pushing aside the stalks. Bullocks scampered after them. He swung his club against the ground as he gave chase, whimpering and grousing. "Hobber, Hobber," he said. He scurried out in front of Wasper and his bird. "If you do not help me, I shall die. If I die, you will have lost Bullocks as a friend. And when the time comes when you need a wild warrior, I won't be near." "Wild warrior," said Wasper, smiling. "Go face your fears." "Please, Wasper," said Bullocks. "Zaz pays me for this kindling," said Wasper. "What'll you pay me for the monster sparring?" "All my wealth," said Bullocks. "All my skins, all my shells, all my bones." "Neither poet nor barterer are you, little friend," said Wasper. "But a few silver coins is worth more to me than your fortune." "Whatever you like," said Bullocks, pounding his club on the ground and pulling at his red beard. "I'll give you silver. I will. Come on, to my cave. Kill the bugger! Kill the bugger!" The little man had bolted back into the thick of the grass, northbound, where the trees tightened. Wasper shook his beard and laughed, then pulled his hat down tight on his head and hopped onto the dodo's back. He sat himself between the bundle of firewood and the creature's neck. "Come on, bird," he said, "after that buggy fellow." The bird, whose name was Kalamoa, obliged. He darted into the grass, following the sounds of the cavey scurrying ahead. The grass thinned over time, and the trees grew closer together. It was a woodier sight. Larches growing free and young, coloured in pageantry, and birches, less gaudy, yet quietly proud. Then oaks and elms and stout trees that crouched to listen to the chatter on the ground. And on the ground there were many folk about their daily life, doing a dozen different interesting things, but Wasper galloped past them all atop his dodo. The woods dimmed. Where once was the bursting yellow of the larch trees, the burning prevalence of colour above and around, dandelions, mushrooms, and even the pale birches, who looked like torrid beams long lain in a hearth. Now the sun lessened, and the trees choked. The earth was grubby. Only Bullocks with his sharp red beard lit the way. They were nearer now to the autumn wing of the wood, though not quite there. Conveniently, they came upon an earth mound littered with pine cones, despite there being no pine trees about. Bullocks hid himself at the hill and the bounty of coniferous jetsam. Wasper and the dodo were close behind. The bird trotted up to the hill where Bullocks had stopped. Wasper dismounted. "So then," he said loudly, "where's the demon?" "Hush up," Bullocks dropped his club and flailed his hands, his blue eyes swelling. In a small voice, almost unhearable, he said, "Past this hill is my cave. That's where he stands." "Fine," said Wasper, no quieter. "I'll go kill him now, I guess. Don't let my bird wander." So the hob strolled away, like he was going for a walk after supper. Bullocks eyed the dodo, and the dodo eyed Bullocks. The cavey bared his teeth and picked up a pine cone, holding it like a shield between himself and Calamoa. The dodo made a sort of bored squawk and sat down, waiting for his master's return. On the other side of the hill, Wasper came upon the home of the cavey. It was a cave, after all. Some called it a burrow, but it was a proper cave of rock, not dirt. Slate and limestone sat dishevelled about the entrance. A dead elm tree grew from its roof. Bullocks was right. There was a tall person guarding the entrance to the cave. Or, at least, with a brief glance and nothing more, one might conclude that. What Wasper saw made him cross his arms and laugh. There stood a scarecrow sort of construction, a figure cloaked in an old bedsheet fitted with several spotty patches. Its head was an ale cask with a face painted on it. 3 different horns and antlers belonging to 3 different animals stuck out from the cask. Likely its body was 2 pieces of lumber pegged together in a T, giving the impression that the figure had outspread arms. Wasper could see its base was nailed to an old log, which in turn leaned against a rock. The hob quieted his laughter. "Bullocks, sure you are that you won't squire me in this fight?" He heard a small voice behind the hill at his back say, "Shh! Shh! Stop him! Hurry!" "All right, monster," said Wasper. "To the death we go." He walked toward the scarecrow. He did not even draw his sword, but pulled the fabricated fellow down to a tilt, and took the cask head off from its pole, then set it on the ground. "All dead," said Wasper. "Come out, cavey." He kicked the headless figure backwards so that it collapsed, and then drew his sword. Bullocks came around the side of the hill, slowly, holding his club with both hands. He saw Wasper, standing beside the monster's head, sword drawn, hat doffed, and the hob bowed low to present his victory. "Yalu Gota," said the little Bullocks. It was a cry of the successful hunt. He hopped around and banged his club against every rock and log and scrap of earth he chose. "You cut the demon's head right off." "I suppose I did," said Wasper, putting his hat back on his head and his sword back in its sheath. "Now, I'm long delayed for Zaz. Pay up, and I shall go." "We do not feast first," said Bullocks. "We do not light the fires of the fox." "No, not at the moment," said Wasper. "You have your cave now, and I'll take my reward and go." Bullocks was in the midst of clouting the cask head to splinters with his club. He hopped and chittered. "Cavey," said Wasper. The little man stopped his revelry. Yes, Wasper, the jewels." He had not promised jewels, but Wasper reasoned that gems and jewels and money were the same to cavies. Bullocks pattered into his cave, kicking aside shale as he went. The hob stood outside, arms crossed. His dodo was beside him after a moment, having found his way from the hill to the mouth of the cave, scratching in the soil for grubs or roaches. "Bullocks, man!" said Wasper. No answer came. There was no sound within the burrow. Wasper shook his head and climbed onto Calamoa's back, and the pair departed. Soon enough they were on the weedy trail again. The grass grew shorter, and afternoon was fading. Wasper led his bird by the reins, cutting through a small meadow to reach where the woods picked up again. It was a worn field, where many neighbours crossed and tramped in all directions to get to where they were going. And while the grass of the fields was flat and stubby, the bluebells and marigolds grew fat as flowers can. Most travellers took care to avoid the pretty things, so there were colourful slivery gardens beside the footpaths. A trio of hedge pigs scuttled by Wasper and the dodo, saying good evening and carrying dark bottles in their arms. A spotted cat crossed paths with the pair. He wore a velvet hat and walked on 2 legs, but did not greet Wasper. At the edge of the field there sat a man, a real man, full grown. a visitor from the other side of the cold pond, where men were said to live in iron cities, and animals no longer talked, where very few hobs and gnomes and the like lived in secret. This man wasn't much taller than Wasper, which made him rather short, by man's standards. He sat against an old birch trunk, doing nothing in particular. His legs were outspread, his arms folded, and his eyes fluttered drowsily. He saw Wasper and the dodo, but acted as though he hadn't. Nothing in his posture or countenance changed. He blinked. As Wasper went his way, passing the man spoke. "I know you, elfling." Wasper stopped and smirked. "Of course you know me, Vanflax. I helped build your house. I've brought you victuals sometimes. I've seen you at soirees and birthdays and night parties." "Ah," said the man, Vanflax. "I thought you were someone else." He was a grungy man. Didn't wash often, it looked. He wore long stockings, once white, no longer, and hard shoes. His shirt was bouncy and striped, his knuckles soft. His face was blocky. He was not young, and a brown beard went around his jaw like lace embroidery. His moustache was plump, yet waxed on each end, so that each side stuck sideways, thin as a needle. He had a hat somewhere in the grass. There was smoke coming from the tree near his head, and Wasper saw what it was. A thorny stick had been stabbed into the bark, and a cheroot cigar protruded from it, leaking smoke. "Where are you going?" said Vanflax. "To Zuz," said Wasper. "Alabaster," said Vanflax, like one says drat or cripes. He snatched the cheroot from the tree and scrambled to find his hat in the grass. "You know Zuz as well, don't you, wizard?" said Wasper, folding his arms and smiling. "Don't know what you mean," said Vanflax, smoke and ash dribbling from his cheroot, which was in his mouth. He patted about the grass for his hat. "Hardly sounds like a name." "What quarrel does Zuz have with you?" said Wasper. "Did you cheat him?" The man found his hat, a shamefully moth-bit rag which had once had 3 or 4 corners. He took the cheroot and smoking stem from his mouth, blew sparks from it, and slipped behind the birch tree. Wasper waved his hand about his face, shooing the flurry of sparks. He looked at the birch, and stepped toward it, and circled round it. But Vanflax was gone. It hardly surprised Wasper. Everyone knew Vanflax to run away. He did it like any other slippery fellow, though quicker, for he was magic. "Come on, bird," said Wasper, going back to the dodo. "We're more than late." At last they arrived at the doorstep of Zuz, the oak hob, as he was called, though the hobs did not call themselves hobs, as previously noted. Zuz had a jolly stone cottage built low and long, with 3 old oaks growing through the ceiling. It looked as if the trees had shot right out of the roof, splitting into different boughs skyward. Really, of course, the trees had been there first, and the cottage built around them. Along with the trees there were 6 chimneys. Smoke rose from half of them. This was strange. Usually all 6 chimneys churned. The courtyard was vines and nettles. Once Zuz had tried laying bricks out for a walkway, but grew tired of the work. He had many half-started refinements about the place. Ideas came to him all the time, but he only had the patience and passion for brewing. On either side of the door were hanging lanterns, already lit for twilight. "Timber trolley," said Wasper, cupping his hands to his mouth. "Timber trolley! Wood's arrived!" He began hefting the kindling and logs from the dodo's back and carrying them to rest beside the doorstep. The dodo, meanwhile, waited patiently, snapping at fireflies that beamed near his head. After a minute, the door opened, and Zuz stood there, drinking from a ram's horn. "Wayward Wasper," said the fellow, "come to sing for his supper." He was smaller than Wasper, being a hunchback. Zuz wore no beard, but a broad moustache, and a nose that might poke out an eye if anyone got too close. "I am late," said Wasper, unburdening the dodo with the last of the wood and dropping it with the rest. He dusted his hands together. "I've had to burn the rot and piddle from my yard," said Zuz. "That is poor planning on your part, Twigchild," said Wasper.
Relying on you for restocking, sure, said Zaz.
Wasper tipped his hat. True enough.
I ought to receive a reduced rate, said Zaz.
I would not contest 1 penny removed, said Wasper.
Aye, that's fair,
said Zaz, nodding and drinking from the ram's horn.
I've just sat down to eat. Come in, Twigchap.
All right, said Wasper. Calamoa the dodo was tied to a tree, though this offended him. He would never wander on his life. But dodos are prone to losing themselves or getting lost, and it was a good measure. Zaz brought the bird a cauldron full of feed, mash, lice, and sorghum. Inside, the hobs ate. Zaz lit his fireplace with the new wood. The whole house echoed with brewing sounds, giddy bubblings, hot pops of pitch, steam hisses, air choking, and leaves sizzling at the surface of his many pots. An animal head was mounted over the fire, something even Wasper did not recognize. Something like a shaggy pig, with a long tongue dripping from its open mouth. There were shelves of books and a fine rapier on the wall. After dinner was done, the friends pulled up stools and lit their pipes, which were made of white clay, and Zaz poured drinks.
Here's a stinkhorn wine, here's toadstool tea, here's a penny bun stout, or the faithful old-fashioned Stratus and gum. What'll you have?
Any holly grog? Asked Wasper, setting his hat on the table.
Any holly grog?
Said Zaz.
Call me a gnome if I haven't a whole room of the stuff.
Out came the holly grog. It made a chortling sound as it was poured. So they sat and smoked and drank and exchanged pleasantries. Wasper told Zaz of the event with bullocks and the slaying of the monster. Then he told him of his sighting of Van Flax, and how the man hurried off when hearing that it was Zaz to whom Wasper went.
Chicken-hearted creep,
said Zaz.
Aye, he cheated me. I paid him to spirit off all the rats in my cellar. Paid him after, mind you. But when he'd left with his coin, the rats were back in a twinkle, running about and gnawing at my stores. He's no sorcerer, just a crook, I say.
Others say he's an excellent spell weaver, said Wasper. He used to be famous.
I say fiddlesticks, said Zaz. If he's so mighty, why not clear out the rats for good? Why not do something great with that sort of power?
Same reason some rich men never spend their riches, I reckon, said Wasper.
Let's say he's quacky and leave it at that, said Zaz. Suppose he's a proper wizard. Aye, that'd be worse.
I'll give him a good shake next time I find his likes, said Wasper, for the whole wood's sake.
Not many men about these days,
said Zaz, biting the stem of his pipe.
All staying in their own country, seems like.
Perhaps, said Wasper. They come and go. A few have stayed, like Flax. Others disappear.
The atrocity got them, likely, said Zaz, before he was got. Or bears, or they kept travelling. Strange folk.
Strange, nodded Wasper. There came a rap at the door. Both hobs drew their swords, only being careful, and went to see who it was. It was no one in particular. Jambi, a red squirrel, with ropes tied all around his body, and scrolls and envelopes slipped between them.
Good night, Jambi,
said Zaz.
Have a drink.
Oh, I wish that, Master Zaz, said the squirrel. I'm on the post, but...
So late,
said Zaz.
It's rude enough.
My apologies, I'm sure, said Jambi. He struggled with the scroll fixed to his ribs, tugging at it and fussing. At last it came loose. There, this concerns you too, Wasper. Fortunate for me, but I lost your letter in the trees. Tragic. Hear ye, then. To the Honourable and Tolerable Master Zaz, Olden Eagle of the Wood extends an invitation to you for the attendance of the wedding of his dear sister, Fair Poppy, to the person, Thomas Brinsley. In holy matrimony shall they be bound, day after next, luncheon time, in the meadow of Viburnum. Food, song, merriment to follow. No gifts necessary, except your good company, or kettles, or cookware. No extraneous guests allowed. All who are invited are welcome.
Fair Poppy's marrying mucky Thomas Brinsley,
was all Zaz said. Use the invitation as you like, said Jambi. I've got a dozen other people to wake. He turned about and scampered into the night. The hobs withdrew to the fire, lighting their pipes again. Zaz read and reread the scroll.
"That rogue tricked fair Poppy into a marriage,"
said Zaz, not believing it. "Without one of your potions, no less," said Wasper, leaning back in his chair.
"Shame,"
said Zaz, crumpling the scroll and popping it into the fireplace.
"Of all the men abroad the country. A blighter, I say."
"Will you go?" asked Wasper.
Depends on who else does,"
said Zaz.
"Will you?"
"If everyone thinks that way, no one will," said Wasper.
"Will you?"
Said Wasper, striking another match. "I suppose."
"Weddings are right snoozers,"
said Zaz. Shrugged Wasper.
"And the olden eagle, the great and perilous eagle, has agreed to this matching,"
said Zaz.
"Life is strange."
"You hardly care," said Wasper.
"I do,"
said Zaz, stamping a foot.
"Hardly, and that's some."
"What is wrong with the man?" said Wasper, yawning.
"Don't you remember?" said Zaz. "Thomas Adder, he's called. Mocker Tom Topsy. Been here for ages."
Wasper stretched his arms. "What a brute!" He picked up his hat.
"Him and another man landed on the shore,"
said Zaz, pouring himself another drink.
"2 of them, though the other villain's name escapes me. Came with pistols and sabres. Rumour was they broke bread with the atrocity. Had tea with him a time or 2. Generally for a while they rambled the neighbourhood, starting rows, nicking from stalls, cheating at cards. Respectable enough. But then they went to grandmother's house, at her welcome, and tried to steal from her. The dogs sent them on their way, as did she, you can imagine. They built a home near the autumn wing of the wood, I think. Got a mouldy club going, meetings and sour wine and all that. Made friends with imps, oodrums and spooks. Started a regular militia. Went round playing at highwaymen. Stupid mannish plots. You don't recall a lick of what I'm saying, do you?"
Wasper had fallen asleep, his hat resting on his brow and nose, his long black beard thrown over his crossed arms like a blanket. Zaz chuckled and finished his drink, then threw another log into the fire. He went outside and led Kalamoa to his barn and undid his bridle. There was a trough of old hay there, and the dodo nested down comfortably for the night. For the rest of the story, follow the link in the description below.